Ending homelessness in the US by 2020 will require us to make significant improvements in the way our homelessness systems function. The department has developed a set of 7 system-level measures to help communities understand their system's performance. This video features measure 5 of the 7 and explains why this measure is important, how it's calculated, and how you might consider using this measure locally. To end homelessness, we have to ensure that all currently homeless people are stably housed and don't return to homelessness. But we also have to reduce the number of people who become homeless in the first place through successful prevention. The goal of this measure is to reduce every year the number of people who become homeless for the first time. Let's look at what this means for Laura, who has never been homeless. She's about to be evicted from her home and doesn't know what to do. She thinks her only choice is to go to the emergency shelter. Before she sleeps at the emergency shelter, though, a worker from the local Homelessness Prevention services meets with her, and they work together to find someplace safe for her to stay. Her sister agrees that Laura can stay for 2 weeks. So with the help of the Homelessness Prevention services, Laura finds housing in those 2 weeks and moves in. She receives supportive services and limited financial assistance until she's stabilized and has a plan for what she would do if she has another housing crisis. At that point, the Homelessness Prevention Project exits her. So she has an HMIS entry and exit for the prevention project, but no stay in shelter. So she was successfully prevented from becoming homeless for the first time. To start calculating a system's performance on this measure, we need to define how to count who becomes homeless for the first time. Because we can't know everyone's life histories, we've defined first-time homeless to mean a person who had not been served by that community's homeless system in the 2 years prior to an entry into that homeless system. So let me show you what I mean, using Bob as an example. Bob stayed in an emergency shelter for a week in February in the current reporting period. If we look back in HMIS 2 years from the day that Bob entered the shelter, we find that he had a stay in a shelter 18 months prior to that stay in February. So he is not homeless for the first time as we've defined it for this measure. So that's the basic concept. Now let's look at how to measure first-time homelessness at the system level. For the first measure, which is 5.1 in the introductory guide, we look at all people who entered emergency shelter, safe haven, or transitional housing during the current reporting period. In this example, 20 people entered these 3 project types during the reporting period: 6 in emergency shelter, 4 in safe havens, and 10 in transitional housing. We then look back from the date each person was first served to see if any of them were served in an emergency shelter, safe haven, transitional housing, or permanent housing project type in those 2 years prior to their individual entry dates. Permanent housing is included in the homeless projects we're checking against, because these projects require that people are literally homeless prior to entry. So in that way, we can make sure we're including previous homeless experiences for those people who may have entered permanent supportive housing without first being served by an HMIS participating shelter or other homeless service project. So of the 20 people who entered into homeless projects during the reporting period, HMIS data shows that 8 of those people were served in the homeless system at some point during the previous 2 years. So that means that 12 were homeless for the first time as we define it for this measure. Now for the second measure, 5.2 in the guide, we'll take this one step further to also consider people who entered permanent housing projects. So let's add in a permanent housing project type to our last picture. We can see that if we count the people who entered into all of these projects, now there are 25 people who entered into the homeless system during the reporting period. So we repeat the exact same analysis to see if any of these people were served in the system at any point during the 2 years before they entered the homeless system this time. And we find that of the additional 5 people in the permanent housing project, 4 had been served in the homeless system in the prior 2 years. So that brings the total to 13 people in the reporting period who are considered first-time homeless. Notice that this measure differs from the others in that it looks at actual whole numbers and not percentages. And this reflects HUD's belief that part of ending homelessness is shutting the front door through effective prevention. And we measure that through total numbers of newly homeless people. There are a number of things you can learn from this and other measures about people experiencing homelessness in your system. You can look at this measure along with the results from Measure 3 and Measure 2 to get a sense of how people are moving into and out of the system over time. Comparing these measures can be useful for spotting trends, but it's also important to remember that not all of the performance measures start with the same universe of people. As your system calculates these system performance measures over several years, you can look for changes that could indicate changes in community conditions. For instance, an increase in people who are homeless for the first time might require changes in the CoC's homeless prevention projects, or changes in performance, like an increase in returns after a permanent housing exit, might require project evaluation to see what's caused the returns. Though not required by HUD, it's valuable information that can help you strategically commit your system's resources and focus on performance as the needs of the people served by your system change. So that was Measure 5, the number of people who become homeless for the first time. Next up is Measure 6.